Sleep. It's a thing that me and you do every single day. It gives us energy and also helps to relax our bodies. A typical human adult needs about 8 hours of sleep. Losing a few hours of sleep once in a while is not that bad, but it introduces a thing called sleep debt, where the amount of lost sleep is accumulated over time. Now, I just want you to take a close look at the third diagram really carefully. Sleep debt can affect attention, concentration, thinking, problem-solving skills, and memory consolidation. And this is the most serious. Not just a normal standpoint, but also operating big machinery like airplanes, buses, or in today's subject, trains. And sleep debt will be the ultimate cause of one of the worst railroad disasters in Canadian railroad history on February 8th, 1986. On February 8th, 1986, Canadian National Train number 413 has departed from Edmonton and is heading towards Edston for a crew change. At Edston Station, the crew of CN 413 has been changed. The crew of CN 413 at the lead is John Edward Hudson, known as Jack, age 48. Brakeman Mark Edwards, age 25, also at the lead. And all the way in the back, in the caboose, is conductor Wayne Smith, known as Smithy, age 33. The consist of CN 413 is an EMD GP38-2W number 5586 and two EMD SD40s number 5104 and 5062, which are pulling a high-speed snow spreader, 35 cylindrical hoppers loaded with grain, 7 bulkhead flat cars loaded with large pipes, 45 hoppers loaded with sulfur, 20 loaded tanker cars, 6 more grain cars, and finally, a caboose. On the other end, Via Rail number 4 is making its route from Jasper to Edmonton on its transcontinental journey. Via Rail number 4's consist is as follows: a FP7 diesel locomotive number 6566, a F9B diesel locomotive number 6633, a baggage dormitory car, a snack car, a Sky Dome car, 2 sleeping cars, a FP9ARM diesel locomotive, which was inoperable at the time and not running, a steam generator car, a day-nighter coach, a cafe car, another sleeping car, and another steam generator car. The steam generator car at the back of the train, or 15404, was heading to Edmonton Depot for maintenance work. The weird concept is a result of 2 trains being combined into one, which are the Supercontinental and the Skeena. The people on board were engineers Mike Pelashati, age 57, and along with Mike was Emil Miller, age 53, which were in the lead locomotive. On board the train were 94 passengers, 14 stewards, and 7 crew members, which come out to 115 people in total. CN 413 departed Edston, heading towards Jasper. 24 miles later, CN 413 is stopped at a siding just outside of Medicine Lodge to allow 2 eastbound trains to pass by.
Dispatch to 413-5506 West. 5586 West over. Good morning, dispatcher. Good morning, Jack. That length of your train there, 5,932. That's the right length, right? I didn't have the chance to check. I think I'm going to check at Medicine. Oh, that's whom. That might be a little late. We got 2 eastbounds coming. 202 is at Hargwin, and 354 is right on his ass on the north track. I'm gonna bring them both to the lodge. Most of your consist is mostly grain cars, right? Pretty sure. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that should be the right length. All right, copy that.
At 2:08 a.m., CN 413 departs from the siding at Medicine Lodge. The trip remained normal, and at 8:20 a.m., the dispatcher at Edmonton flipped the switch at the end of the double track so that CN 413 can let VRO number 4 pass. For context, this section of track was a single track, meaning that only one train can go at once. CN 413 would stop at the end of the double track and wait for the VRO to pass by them. After that's done, CN 413 could go back onto the main line and continue its trip to Jasper. But for some reason, Hudson stops calling out the signals. Smitty tries to get a hold of the head end, but he is only getting responded with static. The train gets closer and closer to the red signal at the end of the double track. At the same time, VRO number 4 is stopped at Hinton and departs Hinton 5 minutes behind schedule, not knowing what's to come. Jack, what's the signal? Jack, what is the signal? Over. Jack, what is the signal? Over. Smitty then switches radios. Jack, can you hear me? Jack, what is the signal? Over. CN 413 head end, can you read me? The dispatcher sets the switch to the main line to allow the VRO to pass the CN. This should have set the absolute 3 aspect signal at the Delhurst control point on the north line, or about 490 feet before the end of the double track, to an absolute stop indication of a 3 steady red lights, telling the freight train to not proceed any further. This should also have set the double aspect approach signal located about 13,600 feet east of Delhurst to yellow over red, telling CN 413 to slow down to 30 miles per hour and to prepare to stop. But the train doesn't slow down. It just continues to go past the signals with Hudson not responding. And CN 413 gets closer to the red signal at the end of the siding with no response from the head end, nor trying to slow down.
Dispatch to number 4, over.
Hi, dispatch. This is Smitty. I can see smoke from up here. It looks like we might be over the bushes.
So, you are saying that you are derailed?
Yes, it looks like it. I tried getting a hold of the head end, but they just wouldn't answer.
Okay, what was the signal at Dalehurst?
Pardon me?
What was the signal when you passed it?
I don't know. The head end didn't call them. I was trying to get a hold of them. What does it say on your panel?
On the panel, it says that it should have been a red signal.
Well, I think we must have ran it. I tried to call them, but they just didn't answer. The only thing I would get was static. At 8:40 a.m., the two trains collide into each other at a combined speed of 108 miles per hour. The force of the collision was so high that it sent a grain car flying into the air and crushed a coach as it landed. In the end, 23 people are dead, with 71 injured. According to one report, a man was seen walking back into the via rail to look for his wife, only to be found dead later with his already deceased wife. Approximately $30 million in damages were reported from lost passenger cars, track, equipment, and goods. But you may be wondering to yourself, how could this all happen? Well, let's take a look at the CN crew. Now, just to get one thing straight, the CN crew is not the sole cause of this accident, nor should they be labeled such. But they played a massive role. But let's go over the CN crew. Hudson, Mark, and Smitty were all sleep deprived, with Hudson only getting 3.5 hours of sleep, Mark only having 5 hours of sleep, and Smitty having only less than 3 hours of sleep. But here's two things that could have contributed to the collision. 1. Hudson's medical record was incredibly poor. Hudson was a heavy smoker, an alcoholic, and suffered from type 2 diabetes and also pancreatitis. And CN did little to nothing to accommodate Hudson's medical record. Now to Mark Edwards, the brakeman. He didn't have that bad of a medical record, but on that day of the collision, he said that he was quote-unquote under the weather with the flu. And also, he worked with the Edston to Jasper line for a really long time. We'll get back to that detail though. Now to Smitty. Apart from being sleep deprived and suffering a lot from sleep debt, nothing was really wrong with him. This was really bad compared to the Via Rail's crew, aka Mike Pelashati and Emil Miller, who were pretty well rested before the collision. But you may be wondering, what about the dead man switch? If you're a newcomer to railroading, a dead man switch is not really a switch. It's more like a pedal that sits in the floor of the cab of a locomotive that must be pressed down all the time during operation. If the dead man switch isn't pressed down while the train's moving, an alarm would sound in the cab. And after a certain amount of time, usually 10 seconds, the train would go into emergency braking. Train engineers could have easily just placed something heavy like a worn-out brake shoe, a rock, or their bag to beat the system. Now, it is entirely impossible to confirm this was the case in the cab of 5586, since the locomotive was eviscerated during the collision. Now, in the inquiry that released in December of 1986, it states that both locomotives were visible to each other for approximately 17 to 19 seconds, but yet there was no action taken. Well, this is where all of the details come up. Hudson likely suffered a diabetic coma or was incapacitated in some way. And with Mark and Smitty being sleep deprived, they were likely sleeping as well. Also, this is where the detail of Mark Edwards comes up. Since Mark worked in this area multiple times, he likely suffered a highway hypnosis, since it was the same stretch of track over and over again. And with him suffering with the flu, this is most likely the answer why Mark Edwards didn't stop the train. Cause in the locomotive, in the cab, where the conductor is, there's a little handle that puts the train into emergency braking if pulled. Because contrary to popular belief, the conductor is the actual captain of the train, no matter how much more experienced the train operator is. But what about the Via crew? According to passengers, there was no brake application seconds before the impact. Well, there are two theories of why. The first theory, Mike and Emil were in a state of utter shock and disbelief that they just couldn't act. And the second theory, they had their head turned, like likely talking to each other, as the CN got closer and closer to them. Since the signal for the VRO turned red a second before the VRO passed the red signal from the CN, forcing itself back onto the main line. Either way, it would have done absolutely nothing to prevent the collision. Also, I just want to shed some light to Smitty's testimony. Smitty persisted that he was trying his best to reach the head end, but other train operators in the area denied such claim. So this is where my theory comes in. If Smitty's statements were true, he likely just forgot to press the talk button on his radio, likely due to brain fog from being sleep deprived. So, have you ever had those nights where you couldn't sleep, and when you go to open a door, you just forget to pull down the door handle before opening the door? Well, that's what likely happened to Smitty. He just forgot to press and hold the talk button on his radio while trying to talk to the head end. This is why Mark didn't wake up from Smitty talking via the radio, since there was no transmission being done. So Smitty was essentially talking to a blank wall. But yet again, this theory is on speculation, so take it with a spoonful of salt. Also, yet again, I just want to say, the CN crew were not the main cause of the derailment. CN knew of Hudson's medical record, but failed to provide or follow up on it. Hell, CN engineers often do shifts that are above FRA limits, which is 12 hours. With one report of an engineer doing a straight 21-hour shift, backed up with another 20-hour shift. Also, some of you might wonder, why didn't Smitty pull the emergency brake lever in the caboose? Well, according to Smitty, he felt that the train was in control due to the slack. But that's most likely from the gradient of the area. In the end, all of the late locomotives were cleaned up and scrapped, along with some passenger cars and several freight cars. Apart from 6300, the locomotive stuffed in the middle of the train was the only surviving locomotive of the Hinton train collision, although it suffered a lot of nose and cab damage due to it tipping over during the collision. And CN and the crew of the CN train were to blame, and Smitty got fired from CN, although after a couple of protests, Smitty was reinstated into CN, but under the condition that he got a job other than conductor. So, in summary, the collision was caused by a company not following up on its employee's medical record, sleep deprivation / sleep debt. After the Hinton train collision, CN has put reset safety control on all of its trains. If you don't know, reset safety control is a safety thing that after a set amount of time, a obnoxious alarm will sound in the cab, and the engineer has to press a reset button, sound the bell, sound the horn, move the throttle, or just move the brake lever. If none of that has happened, the system will assume that the train engineer is incapacitated or sleeping, and put the train into emergency braking. 40 years have passed since this collision, and we haven't really learned our lesson. Train engineers are still being treated like robots. They are expected to be available 24/7 and be able to drive trains for a long amount of time with little rest. Hell, BNSF recently introduced a new policy where if a train engineer is not available for any reason, they gain a point. And with that point, they get reprimanded or get penalties. And with enough points, the engineers just fired like that. But with new safety technology like automatic train control and reset safety control, we can hope that another Hinton will never happen again. To end things off, Via Rail number 6300 is still not scrapped. It hasn't been scrapped, it's still intact. It was the last FP9 to be retired from Via Rail, and it is currently located in Heber Valley in Heber City as a tourist excursion train. With that note, this is the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed, and see you in the next video.